I read the whole Canon review because I wanted to be prepared. This is a movie that I felt like I needed to do a good amount of research on in order to be able to talk about it for at least a little bit of time. Because if I'm being honest, it was a bit to get through. So, you know, but with
It's
all
a
that being
feast.
said,
It's a feast of a movie.
it is indeed a feast of a movie. Ladies and gentlemen, screenagers across the wasteland, we're back with another episode of the Canon, the only movie podcast providing you with a watch list of the most essential movies of all time. We've got a pretty interesting one today. We've got an old silent film. I think one of two silent films that are in the canon, which is kind of weird when you think about it. Like most essential movies of all time, obviously older movies you would think would have like more influence over the scope of film history than others, but we only have two in our canon. But that's fine. It's a canon for a modern audience.
Is it really? Is that true? We only have two in the canon?
I think it's this and one Chaplin movie, and I don't even think it's the Chaplin movie that I would pick. But again, it's a canon for a modern audience. So we're gonna do the broccoli version of an essential movie. Last week we spoke about Terminator, which is just like super fun, not even like candy, just like the most like yummy, delicious steak you'll ever have. And today we're gonna have our vegetables. We've got Sailor Monsoon on the show because he's the only member of the Saw community that I could get to talk about this movie. I think everyone else, all of the other contributors, probably refuse to watch this movie. You know, it's a hard thing to try to convince people to do. You know, hey, why don't you sit down and spend 3 hours to watch an old black and white silent movie from before the U.S. entered the First World War? Like that's a big ask. But we've got Sailor here, our resident film historian, to talk about Intolerance. But before we get into the movie of the week, Sailor, I have a bit of a silent movie. I don't want to say hot take. I'll say really bad idea. And I know it's a bad idea, but I want to bounce it off someone else so that I can just like hear the feedback that it is a bad idea. But I think we should bring back silent movies. Like, I think we should have modern directors make silent movies for modern audiences, and I think everyone should be required to see like 2 to 3 silent movies a year, like new silent movies. How bad of an idea is that?
I don't think it's a bad idea, but I'm going to bounce on another idea, and let's see if we can meet each other in the middle. There are certain directors that love to re-edit movies. Steven Soderbergh famously re-edited Raiders of the Lost Ark, and he made it a black and white movie. He cut out some certain things, and it works. It really works. Topher Grace famously edited all of the prequels into one movie. I like the idea of how about we re-edit modern movies. Let's see if we can make them silent. Well, a perfect example would be Paul Thomas Anderson's There Will Be Blood. I think you can easily edit that into a silent movie because it already kind of works like that.
I was thinking directors who could make silent movies. PTA was one of them, and I feel like you would get a kick out of this other person who I'm going to suggest. Terrence Malick.
Terrence Malick. I think he would. No, he would be perfect. Terrence Malick would be perfect because you strip away the shit I don't like from Terrence Malick, which is the pretentious navel gazing, and then you strip it down to just the scenery. Terrence Malick probably would have been the greatest silent film director of all time. then I only have the cards that pop up intermittently, and then I just have beautiful things to look at. I think Wes Anderson, I think, would knock it out of the park if he did like a Buster Keaton type movie. There's cool. a lot of directors.
Michael Mann could be an interesting one.
That's yeah, that would be interesting because he's more of a stylish director, so I could see where you're going with that. Because he's
Yeah.
when I think of Michael Mann, he's very stylish. You know, Miami Vice, obviously, and Heat. I think it would be a great good idea to strip away directors. Take for example, Quentin Tarantino. His strength is in his dialogue. Take that away
Mm-hmm.
from him, then you can really see what is he capable as a filmmaker. So I think it would be
Yeah.
a nice little exercise for filmmakers to really stretch their abilities. Martin Scorsese, again, his strength is
Mm-hmm.
pop culture references, soundtracks. You need that beautiful dialogue, the acting. You strip that away. What does a Martin Scorsese silent film look like? So I think that would be an interesting idea, but if we don't
It's never
even
gonna
have,
happen.
it's never going to happen. I love that idea. I think A24 would be the one to do it, to give little. I don't want to say little directors little budgets, because I don't think
Mm-hmm.
you need a huge budget. But having said that, this movie, you can't do this on a little budget,
Ooh.
because my goodness gracious,
Yeah.
did this thing cost a mint and a half? It cost $2 million in 1969. Sorry, 1916 money. This thing cost $2 million in 1916 money. There was no way this
Insane.
thing was going to make money. I don't know
No.
why. I, God bless you,
It's
DW Griffiths. You are a madman.
it's like the same as like Indiana Jones or Quantum Mania, Ant-Man costing like $350 million.
What a
It's just like
it
there's like no
makes,
way you're gonna make that
and
money
it
back.
doesn't even make.
But
But that kind of makes sense, because that is at least a property you can hang your hat on and be like, well, people still like Indiana Jones. This is like, hey, you like Jesus? Like, it's like,
yeah.
what?
Well,
It's
this was kind of like pre like like studios like understanding like the finances of filmmaking, right? Like that's how early on this movie was made.
yeah.
But it is still insane, just to think about how much this movie cost for the time that it was made. The last thing I'm going to say about having modern silent movies, I just feel like as audience members, we we're so reliant on like script and dialogue to like understand what a good movie is, and I feel like stripping that away will help us relearn a lot of the language of cinema that makes it great. So like having directors tell you stories through just the image and things like that, I think would be a huge benefit for modern audiences. And I was thinking of like a system where we have like punch cards, and in order to see Avengers 7 or whatever, you have to have seen 3 silent movies from that year before you're able to go see the next Avengers movie or something. Just so we like know that audience members are like seeing the right things and like doing the right homework in order to then get to the popcorn cinema at the end of the at the end of the day.
I need you to buckle down, because this is going to be a weird analogy that's not going to go anywhere, but in my head it makes sense. During the filming of shit, what's the oh shit? It already fell apart immediately. The one with Gwyneth Paltrow in a fat suit, Shallow Hal. There it is. I got you. Yeah, I got it.
Yes.
I'm bringing it
Yeah.
back. When she was making that movie, she was like super depressed, but then she was like, "Oh, I think everyone should live as a fat person for a little bit, because then you can really see what the world is like when people immediately judge you for your appearance." And it was like eye opening for her. It's not like it really stuck, but it was something that she took away from that experience. I think you're onto something. I do think modern audiences today really need not a healthy diet, but they do need to equate themselves to silent movies. And it's not as intimidating as it sounds. This one is DW Griffiths, and there's other directors of this time that are really intimidating because they are so fucking long. And some of them border on miniseries. Some of them are actual miniseries because they were serials. Fritz Lang had multiple movies that
Mm-hmm.
were over 9 hours long. But I think, like, you start with the horror ones. I think those are the easiest ones, and the comedies, obviously, Chaplin, your Buster Keatons, your Harold Lloyds. But the
Hmm.
horror ones, your Nosferatus, I think that's an easy one to get people in. Then, like I said, you start with the comedies, and then you work with the dramas. And the way to get people into the dramas is to really understand this film's importance to cinema. All you have to do is simply look at the film's release around the same time. I mean, years before him, George Méliès was dazzling audiences with cinematic magic tricks, with clever
Mm.
edits and special effects and perspective tricks in movies such as
Hmm.
Trip to the Moon and The Impossible Voyage and like 500 other shorts.
Yeah.
Chaplin was still cranking out entertaining shorts, but he was still a couple years away from making Shoulder Arms. The film everyone cites as the true beginning of his career. And with some notable exceptions, that's about it when it comes to spectacle. Like DW Griffith was the
Hmm.
first one to be like, we can do something else. While his contemporaries were still trying to figure out how to properly shoot what is essentially a stage bound play with static shots and exaggerated pantomime acting, he was really setting the bar higher than anyone else.
Yeah.
So
It's insane
for
that this movie was made when it was.
it really is, and we take it for granted now because we look at it and we go, "Oh, this is just a movie." But it's like you have to remember these guys were inventing it as they were making it.
Hmm.
They didn't know what the hell they were doing. Once the Lumiere brothers made the camera, everyone was making movies and they were just making it up as they went along. Like we take for granted that this movie popularized the usage of close-ups and dolly shots. When they had the first close-up in this movie, I was like, "Oh shit, what?" Because they show the brown girl and they literally close up on her face, and I was
Yeah.
like, "Oh shit!" Because you forget, oh,
Well, Sailor, I'm gonna stop you for a sec because we're starting to get into the movie, and I feel like
oh, okay,
it'll be
yes.
important for you know let's try to contextualize this for our listeners because I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who have not seen Intolerance, maybe aren't even familiar with it, and are sort of learning about it for the first time here listening to this episode. So I feel like before we continue to like dive a little bit deeper into the movie, let's one talk about some of the background of it, and then also just give us a brief, very quick overview of like the synopsis of this movie. What is it about? What's the overall story? We've established that it's 1916 silent movie. You've established what others within the industry and other filmmakers around the world are doing. So just give us like a quick synopsis of what this movie is about, so that we can then
Well, do you
understand
want me to
what it
start
is
with the
that we're
plot
talking
of
about.
this movie or why it was made in the first place?
I feel
Well,
like
I can
why it
start
was
with
made is going to be a longer. That's going to be a
yes,
longer
it
conversation. So
is.
let's do the synopsis first. Quick plot
Okay, well,
overview.
it is a movie about intolerance. The movie is what it is about. It is four stories, all set in different time periods. And before I describe it to you, when I say four different time periods, all about a time that about intolerance, in your mind, you probably have already structured it like the Lord of the Rings books, where it's a story and then it stops, and then another story and then it stops, and then another story. But that's not how this movie works. It actually intercuts between the different stories and it bounces around, which is, again, another influential thing that this movie does. So this movie is the beginning of the modern filmmaking. It just is. But the four stories are ancient. There's an ancient Babylonian story depicting how the conflict between Prince Belshazzar and Cyrus the Great of Persia lead to the fall of Babylon. Then there's basically the crucifixion of Jesus. Then there's a Renaissance chapter that led to the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. And then the best story that takes up the bulk of the movie, is a workers' strike that leads to an innocent man getting put to death row and his lady love trying to save him. So those are the four stories. and the movie bounces
Beautiful.
back and forth between them at like once this story hits its either action emotional climax or action heavy climax, it'll immediately jump to the other one. So it's always, I don't want to say you're never going to get bored. We'll get there in a second, but it is DW Griffiths is doing a good job of constantly keeping all of the plates in air, and I think that's
Hmm.
admirable. I think it might have worked better if you might have just had one story and then the next story and then another one. Maybe not. I don't know, but I do
Oh,
respect.
interesting.
I don't know because this is not an.
Because it's kind of like the stories will like cut back and forth as the themes, emotions, morality like line up with each other. So it's like, okay, we reach the point in all the stories where, like, essentially the beginning of the movie, right? You have the intro up to the inciting incident, we'll say, in one story, and then it will go to the next story, and it's the intro up to inciting incident, so on and so forth. Which is like, I feel like that works better, but I don't know. Sorry, I
Well, I
cut you
don't.
off. I know you were saying that
No.
the opposite.
Well, my problem is, and this isn't a negative podcast. We like to champion movies, and this is a movie you have to see. If you are a historian, a cinephile, if you have any interest in the history of film, this is one of the first epics you have to contend with. You just have to. This, like I said,
Hmm.
this is the beginning of the modern filmmaking. But if I was to make this movie, I would cut out the Jesus story and the other. I think this really would only work with the two stories: the Babylonian story, which is the most epic,
Hmm.
because we're going to get into this, because that's where all the money was spent, clearly,
Yeah.
and the 1917 story, which is the most intimate. So
Hmm.
when you have the balance of the epic and the intimate, I think that's all you really need. I don't need the story of Jesus, to be honest with you, and I don't need the other story. I think it bogs it down because, again, this is 3 hours. This is a
Yeah.
lot of movie. This is
Okay, Sailor, can I
full.
tell you something?
Yes, go ahead.
Because I feel like this will be interesting for the rest of this will color the rest of our conversation. So I watched this movie on Amazon Prime, and I didn't realize when I was going to watch it that the version on Prime, which is 2 hours and 10 minutes, is not the full movie. But I still feel like within those 2 hours, I got the gist of it.
You
And
son of a bitch! You.
but so one thing that that I read while doing research on this movie is that this is a movie that it's like disputed what the definitive cut is. There's no like director's edition that is like, this is the version of this movie that you need to watch. It's like debated amongst historians and film scholars and stuff of which version it is that people should be watching. Apparently the original version that was released was then DW Griffith would and we'll get to him in a second, but he would like continuously cut it and recut the movie into different versions for like subsequent releases, like week to week and like place to place. So there's like a million gazillion different versions of this film out there. No one knows which one is the definitive version. And it seems like I think from the 2 hour version that I watched, I'm pretty sure I got the gist of it,
You
and
definitely
didn't
got
have
the
to sit
gist.
through the 3 hours that you sat through.
And I sat through them. Now, I give you shit, but full disclosure, every time I watch a silent movie, and I don't think this is cheating, because
Hmm.
movies were made with hand crank cameras, so they are a little bit slower. I watch every silent movie at 1.5 speed. It's just a little bit
I think that
faster. I don't think
that
that's
may
a
have
cheat.
been. I don't think the version that I watched was like cut differently. I think it was like, because there's like a 3.5 hour version of this movie, and then like a 3 hour version, a version that's like slightly under 3 hours. But I'm pretty sure the version that I watched was just at like a higher frame rate. It was just like sped
Mm,
up a little bit because of what you're talking about. So
yeah, I that's how I tell every single person if they're going to watch silent movies, watch it at 1.5 speed. You can still read the cue cards. The acting,
mhm.
it doesn't affect anything. It just makes the music just sound like crazy calliope music because it's going crazier. Other than that, I'm getting the gist of the movie. It's not like it's going
Mhm.
crazy fast. It's just like a frame faster than it normally would be, and that you really kind of needed to get through this movie. Not to say this isn't a negative podcast. I'm just saying this is a little bit slower than modern audiences would be accustomed to, because if you're watching in your mind, if you're like, oh, 3.5 hours, I've seen that. I've seen Avengers. Well, Buckaroo, sit down. This isn't it. But I will say that there are action sequences in this that are on par with
Mhm.
your Avengers movies, and I legitimately mean that, because, like we said, this thing costs $2 million in a time where a steak dinner costs $2. two
Yeah.
million dollars is
To
a
put
lot
that in
of fucking
perspective,
money.
I think you did the actual calculations in the piece that you wrote for the official Canon on Screen Age Wasteland, and $2 million at this time, or in 1916, that equates to, I think it was $80 gazillion
Yeah.
uh, in modern currency. So
And I
yeah,
wrote that two
it
years
costs a
ago,
pretty
so the inflation's gone up a little bit more. So you got to add a couple
yeah.
zeros to that. It,
80 mega
that's
gazillion dollars.
80
Yeah.
mega bucks. Some new form of currency that only Musk and Bezos have. Yeah, that's
Uh,
$2 billion. Then, but you see it on the screen. Like, there is the
yeah,
Babylonian fight scenes, the big gate that they make, the big set that they had on that lot for decades. That they had that set up for decades because they didn't know what to do with it. They're like, I don't.
absolutely insane.
We made it. We don't know what to fucking do with it, because they felt like it was sacrosanct to even touch it. They're like, we can't touch it. So it was just sat there. And so somebody's like, fucking get rid of this. Just get it out of here. But I would have loved to have seen, like, California at that time, just seeing that huge set. And then finally, like 20 years later, being like, oh, did they finally get rid of that ugly ass eyesore? Because by that time, it was just a giant pile of wood. Like, it wasn't like you see in the movie that had the nice engravings and architecture and all this stuff, the statues and whatnot. It's just giant wood, giant
It's junk.
junk, and you're like, fucking hell, when are they gonna get rid of that? And they finally do.
So we've got a basic synopsis. We've got the insane amount of money that this costs, and we will circle back to that. But I feel like we've gone long enough in this conversation without talking about the director himself. I feel like, and again, you've stated this multiple times, this isn't a negative podcast. We're here to celebrate, achievements of film. We're here to celebrate essential movies. But we've mentioned the name a few times, and there might be some listeners out there who are like, DW Griffith, that name sounds familiar. Where do I know that from? He is, I guess, depending on, the film circles or historical circles that you run in or read, or, whatever it is, he might not be most famous for Intolerance. I had always known this particular director as the guy who gave us Birth of a Nation, which is, in its own respect, also a super influential movie. It like sort of gave us the format for feature length films as we understand them today. Obviously with Intolerance, he sort of takes that to the next level. But the other big thing with Birth of a Nation is its celebration of the birth of the Ku Klux Klan. And it's like the first, well, it's the first of many movies, but it's also the first movie to sort of celebrate this like the South will rise again sort of spirit. So it has like an uncomfortable place within movie history, because you're like, well, on the one hand, it's super important, but on the other hand, it's like kind of a vile message. So then you get to an Intolerance and you're like, okay, like how do I read a movie by the same guy who made Birth of a Nation? Also, this movie is called Intolerance, and it's about intolerance and how it is something that like stops us from just like spreading like love and empathy the way that we want to, and like how do I take that message coming from this guy, which was all super weird to grapple with. But I don't know if you heard this anywhere, but I think this is kind of a funny way to read it, is that Intolerance was maybe, it may or may not have been made as a response to criticism that DW got after Birth of a Nation, which was like a huge success, like blockbuster smash hit, made a gazillion dollars, which was then, I'm sure like he turned around and used that gazillion dollars to make this movie. But people were like, hey, this movie's like pretty disgusting and like super racist and like kind of weird. So then some stories say that he saw that criticism and then was like, well, I'm not like an intolerant person. I don't actually believe all these vile racist things. Here's a movie about how intolerance is so bad. But then the other reading is that he was upset with people criticizing him and like his right to free speech, that he read that as the intolerance, and like that's what he's getting at with this movie. I don't know if you've seen anything that suggests like one or the other, or just how you feel about Birth of a Nation and then that sort of like birthing this. I've also read reports that he was already in the process of making this when Birth of a Nation was like out in theaters. So like the two aren't necessarily related, but I'm gonna shut my mouth and let you take the reins on this one, on the rest of that, Sailor.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. If you are unfamiliar with Birth of a Nation, like Raph said, it is about the history of America but the rise of the Ku Klux Klan and its involvement in that. And yes, it is an ugly movie to watch. It's a hard movie to watch. It's a very controversial movie to watch. And it was a controversial movie then. It was a hugely problematic movie. But it was also a huge hit. It was a smash hit. It was a cultural phenomenon. Merchandisers sold sheets with cutout holes and aprons, and ushers would dress in Klan robes. Like, it was a culture. Like, imagine that. Put your mind in the space of then. Like, the fact that,
I'd rather
yes,
not.
people. I know, but the fact that, but you have to at least applaud the fact that it was controversial. Yes, it was a smash hit, but there was enough people that were like, "This is horrible. This is horrible." So the fact that there were enough people to be like, "Jesus Christ, what are you doing?" is I at least like to look at that part of the history of it. But the fact that this was like the Avengers of their time, so instead of seeing kids dressed up as Hulk and Iron Man, they're wearing sheets to that premiere. Like, that's horrible. And yeah, I did
Didn't
research on
President
it.
Wilson have like multiple screenings of it at the White
Sure
House?
did. He sure did. One of his favorite movies. He sure did. Um, yep,
Yeah.
America. No, yeah, I did a lot of research on it because that was the story that was told for a long time, was that DW Griffith was so ashamed by the reaction of it, and he was like, "Oh, that's not what I meant at all. Here is the actual truth. I'm sorry. Here's my mea culpa. That is not the truth at all. Like you said, it was the fact that that he felt there was unjust restrictions put on his right of free speech. That's the honest to God truth. There's a reason why Quentin Tarantino can't stand D.W. Griffith, and it's, yeah, he was probably a horrible fucking racist. So might have been John Ford, because he was also a Klansman in this movie. Just saying. But we talk about that for another day. But you can't talk about the history of film without grappling with, because as horrible as it is, because it's not just a controversial movie, because if that's all it was, it would have been just forgotten to the
Mm-hmm.
sands of time. No, D.W. Griffith, say what you will about the man, and there's a lot you can say about the man, he is a pioneer of cinema. He just is. So you have to look at it and go, okay, removed from 2023 eyes, and even then, like I just said, it was controversial then. But remove from that, remove the controversy, just look at it as a piece of art. How does it hold up? I think it's as good a movie technically as this.
Mm-hmm.
Narratively, I think it's weaker than this because at least this movie is more ambitious because it is
Mm-hmm.
juggling. This movie, if you didn't get it from my plot description, it is very much the Cloud Atlas of its day. If Terrence Malick directed Cloud Atlas in 1916, that's this movie. If that makes sense to you, then you've already seen this movie. It's the Cloud because also that movie was made for a shit ton of money and made nothing, and it's a lot of
Yeah.
stories. I actually really love Cloud Atlas. But and that's not in the canon, so we can't talk about it. So, all right, past Birth of a Nation, then DW Griffith makes this, and then this movie flops, and it flops hard. Now, history would like to tell you, just like the jumping the shark meme that everyone uses all the
Mm-hmm.
time, like, oh, Happy Days died once Fonzie jumped the shark. Let me remind everyone who says that all the time, Happy Days went on to last for 5 more seasons. Can you really say that it really killed the show? It didn't. The show lasted 5 more fucking seasons. DW Griffith directed 35 more movies after this. Did it really kill his career? No. The General killed Buster Keaton's career. There's a reason why Buster Keaton, 20 years after that, ends up in fucking Beach Blanket Bingo. Because his career was dead. DW Griffith's was not. Did he ever have the budget of this again? No. But he kept on working until he died. And he made some good movies after this. But, so, the history.
So,
Go ahead.
well, I don't. No, keep going. I don't have a place to pick it up.
Well, I was going to say, like, history would like you to know, would like to tell the story of this great failure, which it is, that killed his career. This movie came out in 1916. He stopped directing in 1947.
Yeah.
Or technically, 1931 is
Mhm.
really his last movie. That's
But he
not.
was still working. Yeah.
He was
So
constantly working, and Broken Blossoms, I would argue, is better than both of these movies because it's not an overblown fucking mess of a movie. It is a great movie. He made good movies after this. This wasn't. I'm not talking shit about this movie.
no, I know you're not. I do want to bring us back to this movie because we've given a lot of context both before this movie and after this movie, and we've spoken a little bit about what the movie is about, but we haven't really. You've mentioned it here and there of sort of the elements that make this movie so monumental for its time and for all of film history. But I think that we should also set aside some time for us to talk about that. So I feel like we should get into what it is about the movie itself that that makes it so influential, such a crucial moment in film history. Because we're talking a lot about it, and I think people might still be wondering, why is this movie in the canon? Do I really need to watch it? All of that stuff.
I know it
And
does. It does sound like I'm
I
a little overly critical in this movie, and I'm overly critical in every movie I watch.
oh,
But
no, I'm not saying that you're overly critical. I'm just saying that like the two of us should dive into the actual elements of this movie that make it essential, you know?
well, we covered some of it. Like I said, this is the beginning of close-ups.
Mhm.
That's where we had to jump forward or backwards a little bit, and then work to where we are now. Yeah, when the movies from this time, like I said, were like basically stage plays. They would set the camera, and then there would be action on that little set, and then they would move the
Mhm.
camera to somewhere else, and that's how they just shot movies, just like a play. And some directors would get a little bit more creative with it, like Buster Keaton would stand somewhere and something would fall on him, or something crazy like that. But by and large, that's what you did. That's what Chaplin was making at this time. He hadn't gone to the bigger epics. He would be in a room, and there would be situations in this room that would cause some comedic hijinks, like, oh, I dropped oil on the floor, now I'm going to slip around. That would be
And
basically all it would do. It
the
would
camera
static.
would
It's
capture
not
all of it.
moving.
Yeah,
Yeah. This
exactly.
movie
So
has
this movie
dolly
is
shots. It has close-ups. Like DW Griffith. There's chase sequences with the horses, and he's moving around. When he shot the scene, the famous scene, the Babylonian Gates, and you see the 60,000 extras, and you see all these things. He's in a hot air balloon filming this shit. Like, it's
insane.
crazy. Like, that was the only
Insane.
way for him to capture this, and no one was doing that before. I mean,
It's like the first
Hollywood.
version of a crane shot. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a damn balloon. I mean, there's famous stories of Orson Welles not being able to get a shot, so he just hired somebody to take a sledgehammer to the set so he could build a hole, so then he put the camera where he wanted it. And
Yeah, so you
D.W.
get a low
Griffith
angle
did.
shot.
Yeah, D.W. Griffith did that 40 years earlier in a damn hot air balloon because he's like, I got to get all this shit on camera, and to see that and to see everything. I mean, all right, again, to put into perspective, the three biggest movies I would say around this time was Cecil B. DeMille's The Cheat, which doesn't use any crazy camera moves, but pushed acting forward in a way that this movie certainly doesn't, and most movies don't, because, like I said, they're still doing exaggerated acting because they wanted everyone to understand the emotions at all times. And I'm not going to criticize the acting on this. That's just what it was. Like, they wanted everyone, whether or not you could speak English, read the subtitles, you can basically, you can at least follow the emotions of the actors. Maybe not the story, because there's a lot of story to unpack here. And I actually did have to read some of the Wikipedia to be like, all right, what? Why is this person doing this? I really honestly couldn't really follow some of this. And I was paying attention. I was taking notes. I'm like, why is she doing this again? Because it does jump around, so I can understand why audiences in 1916 were like, fuck this. I'm not watching this. There's a lot to grapple with.
So
Cabria, the Pastrone film that has huge sets. We're gonna get there. You said to lay the scene why this movie is important. I'm setting context.
I know you're. I wasn't sure if you were going to get back to the other movie that was big at this time to contextualize.
No, yeah. the cheat from DeMille. I'll always bring it back, baby. Cabria.
I was just wondering how long it was going to take.
It took like 2 seconds. And then 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which was the first movie that used underwater photography. Those were the three big movies at that time that were pushing technology. This movie trumps
I think
all
what
of
you're
them.
saying about this movie, and correct me if I'm wrong or if this is not what you're actually getting at, but this movie is creating a like cinematic visual language that we now in the year 2023, like, because we've lived with movies for 100 plus years, like, we just understand it. It's like second nature to us, right? Whereas if you're an audience member in 1916, or if you're a filmmaker in 1916 going to see this, you don't yet know what it means to utilize a close-up shot in a particular moment of the emotional journey of a movie. You don't understand what it means to use a giant sweeping crane shot in the climax of the action yet. Like, these aren't things that people were familiar with. Like, within this movie, Griffith is like literally writing the language of cinema that we still use to this day.
Yes.
Now you give me a one-word answer?
Yes. That's exactly what I said. That's what I was gearing up to, but you kept trying to cut me off. Yes. What I was saying was those were the three big movies, and those aren't even close to this. The only person he was in competition with was himself with Birth of a Nation. Like, he was in a league of his own. No one else was making movies like this at this time on this level. Like I said, camera, actors, end of scene. Camera in another set, actors, end of scene. Like, that was it. There wasn't shot, reverse shot. There wasn't close-ups. There certainly wasn't fucking dolly shots. There wasn't big epic sets like this. Like, when you look at Cleopatra or Ben-Hur or the movies that this movie literally laid the way for. Like, you could trace this movie's DNA, this fingerprints on so many movies that you trace back
Oh
to
yeah.
this. They're just doing what DW Griffith did in 1916. Like, it's crazy.
The
And
movies
it's
that you love and the movies, not you, Sailor, but the movies that, listener, you love, the movies that influenced those movies were influenced by this movie.
it's everything. It's
Yeah.
everything. Everything that you love about film. I'm not going to say started with D.W. Griffith, because George Méliès also deserves a lot of credit, because he was a magician before he was a filmmaker. So he knew how to hide the magic with edits and forced
Mm-hmm.
perspective. So he gets credit for that and special effects and whatnot. D.W. Griffith knew, how can I sell this emotional scene? Boom. Close-ups. Boom, moving the camera closer up to the face. And again, this is common shit. But it wasn't in 1916, and it wouldn't be for a couple more years. So
No.
this is it's in my review that I told you. Pauline Kael said Birth of a Nation was the greatest movie of all time, the most important movie of all time, and she thought it was the greatest movie of all time. One of
Mm-hmm.
those things is inarguable. And I
She
think
called
this
it what,
movie
one
is
of the three
it is
most
dumb.
important movies ever made,
And
and
she
she
also
calls it the
said
best.
the greatest. I bump up
Yeah.
against that because it's not. But it laid the foundation, and I think this movie it should get even more credit because of its narrative, and because it's
Yeah.
not
Well,
just the, like I said, it's not just here's the story, here's another story. That actually probably would have been worse. I just think it would have worked better with two stories. But the fact that he keeps cross cutting, which is also something that no one else was doing. No one else was doing various narratives in their movies at this time.
dude, no one did it for like another, like like little, not 40 years. Like people weren't doing it for like another like 70 years.
Yeah, he was.
Like we think of like this kind of storytelling as like, oh yeah, Quentin Tarantino invented that. And you watch this movie and you're like, what the fuck? Like someone was doing this in 1916. Like we're cutting across different stories to like convey like the same like emotional message. Like that's nuts. Also, why was no one doing this for, the 70 years in between those things?
It's very avant-garde if you look at it through the perspective of how ahead of the time it was. Like he was really punk rock in that way. And I also love the color tinting of this movie. I'm not going to say that's
Well,
him, because
talk
it
about.
wasn't. That's that. Whenever you are depicting night, it's always a blue tint. If there's strong emotions, you're going to go with a darker reds. Like if a character is super angry and it's an emotional scene, you're going to go with a more red. If you're going with a big battle scene, the color tint would be more, let's say, their outside scenes were more yellow tint. And when I say this,
Mhm.
people are visualizing something different. Than it's a color tinting that we don't use anymore. So you're going to have to look this up, because I don't even know the process myself. I don't know the technical terms for certain things, because we don't have that 3-strip color process anymore, and this was far before that.
I think it
So
was all tinted in like the editing process,
yeah, and I mean,
but
because
still,
it.
like
Go ahead.
that's super ahead of its time to use color to convey different messages. Obviously in early black and white cinema, that wasn't something that people like really had their
I
hands
can't I
on.
can't I can't. I'm not going to give it to him, because I don't think he was the first to use it. I don't even think he was the first to popularize it. I do think people immediately keyed into that, where they're like, let's mess around with color. That's something that was always there. But I do think it's used to great effect here. That's what I'll say.
Hmm.
Definitely during the battle sequences, because in the battle sequences, he does a good thing, an interesting thing, where in the night sequences, instead of using that blue tint, like I said, he goes really dark. and it's all lit by torchlight, and it's you have, like I said, 60,000 extras, and you have all these torches, and you have this outside battlescape. It really makes for a visual feast of a scene where you're like, my God, this man was working on another level. And the reason why, to go back to that Terrence Malick comparison, is because he
Mhm.
didn't. There was no script to this. I don't know if you know this. He
He was
never
just
wrote
working off
anything down.
vibes.
It was all in his fucking head. So he gave people a basic outline of what the scene was and their emotion and shit, but there was no script. That's why there's multiple edits of this movie, because he was still rewriting it after the fact.
Mhm.
He probably also tried to recoup his money by making some shorter edits and whatnot. But no, yeah, he was working straight out of his head, and that's impressive to me. While I don't think it's necessarily all works, but the fact that he did it without a script, that is insane. That's insane. 4 stories, 4 different time periods, and there's no script. And
That's the beauty
audience,
of silent films. No, no dialogue. You don't really need a script. You just go out there and you play it live, and whatever whatever you feel
I
like
don't think
shooting, you
people
shoot it.
I don't think people today understand that not only is there a script, there's a shot list. There is somebody drawing the shots. So the director always knows, where is my camera? What is my camera looking at all times? So not only is there a script, there is multiple different things for the camera to be like, all right, this is the shot composition. This is what I'm working off of. So there's
You're giving too
always
many
things.
directors too much credit. I feel not everyone's storyboarding these days.
I mean,
Let's just shoot for coverage.
yeah, you're not wrong there, but well, that's the
I
reason
know
why.
what you're getting at. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's the standard. Your boy Terrence Malick doesn't play that game, but most people, I mean, they probably have AI drawing these damn storyboards now. Who the hell knows what they're doing now? But that's the standard thing, is the storyboards. The fact that he had all of it in his head, that's. I mean, even Akira Kurosawa, when he made Ran, which he was just lived with that movie in his head for 15 years, he drew all of that out though, because he was constantly drawing. Because he's like, I'm never going to make this movie, so he just started drawing it. So he at least technically had storyboards because he had all these drawings.
Great
DW
movie.
Griffith didn't have any. He didn't have any of it. So that's, again, I know it's a rambling statement and it's a lot of obvious shit, but it's like, do you? Here's my question: do you like movies?
If the answer is yes.
Thank D.W. Griffith. Like, that's really all you have to do. Like, he's one of the most influential directors of all time. It's like inarguable. Is this one of the most important movies of all time? Absolutely. Is he a good filmmaker? I mean, based on the fact that he made 2 of the most important movies of all time. And it's not even like a James Cameron thing where we can argue the quality of a Titanic and of an Avatar, and we can argue the debate of the quality of a movie versus its box office gross. This is inarguable. Titanic didn't really change cinema. Avatar didn't really change cinema. I mean, it pushed 3D in a way, and it did bring back epics in a certain way, but it didn't really change cinema. D.W. Griffith changed cinema. So that's why this movie, and not Birth of a Nation, is in the canon.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think this movie is also just so much more of a gamble. It's so much more ballsy. It's like a lot more audacious. This movie is than Birth of a Nation. I have only seen Birth of a Nation in clips and such. It's still taught at a lot of schools or a lot of film schools. Just like the significance of it in film history. But I think this movie is probably more important. It's probably informed more of modern audiences' favorite movies across the years. It's definitely influenced a lot of movies that we that are also in the canon. It's influenced movies that influence other movies in the canon. It's like, I hate to use this phrase, but like essentially everything is derivative of this. Like if you like movies, like you can probably trace all of your movie taste back to this movie. Whether you're a Nolan fan, Spielberg, Tarantino, like Greta Gerwig, Jordan Peele, like Ari Aster, like whoever is like your favorite filmmaker today, you can in some way like draw a line back to Intolerance as informing what it is that your favorite filmmaker is doing, which is pretty insane. Um, Obviously, a movie that came out when it came out is going to have more tentacles reaching out to the rest of films and film history, but it is still insane how much this movie influenced just like the rest of movie making for the rest of time. So I think because of that, we have to include it as an essential movie, right, Sailor?
100%. If once when asked Orson Welles, somebody asked Orson Welles, "What are the 5 greatest directors of all time?" And he said, "John Ford, John Ford, John Ford, John Ford, and John Ford." Now, if there's no John Ford without D.W. Griffith, what does it tell you about D.W. Griffith? If the greatest director of that time is citing another director, and that director doesn't exist without D.W. Griffith, what does that tell you? I mean, sometimes
I feel like that's enough of an endorsement.
I mean, it is what it is. It's. Do you need to see this movie? I think everybody who loves film, even if you're going to take the easy way out and watch the edited version like Raph did, the little cheat. I'm not gonna blame you, but just for the battle scenes alone, just for its use of the techniques that he pioneered, just for the fact that it is a beautifully shot movie. And the thing is, yes, it is a bit slower in the beginning, but an hour and a half, 90 minutes in, which is the halfway point, then once the action and the emotion starts getting to a higher pitch, the edits are quicker. It starts moving quick. Like it's really picking up steam. So
Another example of informing the language of cinema, right? Like using editing to quicken the pace of like the action. And
yeah,
to,
he's
like, give you
creating
a sense of
tension. He's
urgency.
creating dread. He's the man knew what he was doing. Too bad he was a horrible racist.
Yeah.
But the thing is, this movie wouldn't exist without that movie, and movies wouldn't exist without that movie either. So it's like you gotta take. What is the old saying? In order to make an omelet, you gotta break some eggs.
You gotta break some eggs.
In order to create cinema, you have to be a racist.
Yeah,
like,
we just need a little bit of racism on the front end in order to have 100+ years of movie history.
That's
Personally, I'm not a big fan of racism, but I'm a huge fan of movies.
Oh,
so
talk about a hot take, Raph. How brave! Hashtag how brave.
I guess I'll take it. Speaking of DW being a racist and a Confederate sympathizer, I think his father was like a prominent member of the Confederacy, and that's sort of where all of that comes into play. Also, before we get into like, I feel like we gave our final words on why this is essential, but so before we get into recommendations, do you think that with the Jesus portion of the movie, do you think DW is calling himself a Jesus figure and saying that he was crucified for just, saying that the South will rise again?
God damn it, Raph. Yeah, that is exactly what he's doing. I didn't read into it, but yeah, you're 100. God damn it. I dislike it even more now. Son of a bitch. I didn't want it in the movie because it doesn't really serve any narrative function. Because you already get what you need from the 2 other stories, and the other one is what it is. The fact that that's exactly the fact that he got.
It's just like classic like Christian playing victim game. Like,
yeah. God,
I mean, this same thing with the French story, like the the Protestant Huguenots being, slaughtered by the Catholics is just like, oh, we've always had it so bad as Protestants, we couldn't even practice our religion without Catholics getting in the way. It's like, come on, guy. You made a racist movie. That's why everyone's shitting on you. You can't woe is me your way out of racism. But I guess he kind of did.
Here's the thing. I take it back. I'm sorry. He's not the Terrence Malick of his day. If Kanye West made an epic back in the day, he has more parallels with Kanye West than I fucking realized. Look at that. It all leads back to DW. Look at that. All roads lead back to DW Griffith.
That's such a weird place to end the conversation about this movie.
It sure is. It sure is. But, that's intolerance for you.
That's intolerance. That's intolerance. On the surface, before you dig into the filmmaker and what the movie is maybe actually about, I think on the surface we can all agree that intolerance is bad, that we should all embrace tolerating others. We should all embrace love and empathy and all of those things. And I think that this movie does get that message across. I just think if you want the message to stick, don't look into the filmmaker behind it and maybe what his thoughts of intolerance were.
Yeah. I mean, if I do genuinely believe his heart was in the right place, it'd be like, you know what? Hey, man, everyone makes a mistake. Like, I don't hold... This might be a hot take. I truly do not believe Disney was trying to make a racist movie when they made Song of the South. I think their heart was in the right place. I genuinely believe that. I mean, the fact that the actor who played Uncle Remus, apologies to that actor, I can't remember his name right now. He is the first black man to ever win an Oscar. I think we forget that when we want to erase that from film history. He is the first black actor, not actress, of course, Gone with the Wind, but he is the first. So I think if I genuinely believe that D.W. Griffith's heart was in the right place, it'd be like, like Brian De Palma made Carrie After Blowout because he was afraid of not Carrie After Blowout. Shit, what do you make after Blowout? Because he was getting accused of misogyny and shit, and he's like, I'm not a misogynist, you sons of bitches. Directors sometimes course correct because they get accused of certain things, and I do believe, like William Friedkin, I truly do not believe was a homophobe when he made Cruising. I think he was trying to make a horror movie set in the gay community. And I understand why they had their pitchforks up because they were going through it. And this movie is it is what it is. But I think his heart was in the right place. I don't think D.W. Griffith's heart was in the right place when he made this movie. And I genuinely don't think his heart was in the right place when he made the movie before this. But having said that, this is an important movie. It has to be in the canon. It just has to be. It just has to be. You can't. Well, I think I'll button this and then we can move on. But all I'm going to say is I understand the need to try to erase uncomfortable history, but it does a disservice to history when you do that. Yes.
Oh.
D.W. Griffith is probably an ugly man in real life. I don't know the man. I don't know. Maybe he did. Maybe his heart was in the right place. I don't know. All I am going to say is to erase somebody. Like right now, they're trying to erase the language of older James Bond books and shit. I'm like, we're course correcting too hard, guys. Maybe if you want to slap a warning on it, maybe. But no, we're not going to edit history to make it more palatable. No, do I think you should see Birth of a Nation? Yes. Do I like it? No. Am I a fan of this movie? I'll never watch it again. Did I need to see it? Absolutely. And I am glad I saw it because there are shots in this that will last forever. That, especially all the 1917 stuff, that really should have been the movie, and it expanded from that. Mm-hmm. There's so many shots with the faces and the cells. And there's just talking to each other right before they get hung. Is it hanged or hung? I never know. I don't care.
I think it's hanged. Okay.
Hung sounds better in my head. Hanged before they get hanged. That scene is heartbreaking and beautifully shot. Like I said, the Babylonian fight is amazing. It's a well choreographed epic of a fight scene, but I'm not for erasing the past to make it easier for the future to deal with shit. No, deal
Well,
with it.
Sailor,
This is art, and art is sometimes hard to grapple with.
I'll say two things. One, if we erase movies like Birth of a Nation and things that are, difficult to watch, we'll never learn from them. We'll never learn how to be better than, what they are. We'll just fall into the same mistakes, what's the famous saying, like those who do not know their history are doomed to repeat it. So we do need to keep these texts like the way that they are in order to understand what they are, and then also to understand like how to grow and build on top of that. The second thing I'll say, and then we can get into recommendations, is I'm just happy that it's this movie that's in the canon and not Birth of a Nation.
It would have been a much, because this is a easier movie to watch. Let's just be. It's
Yeah.
not an ugly movie to watch in any capacity. It is slower. That's the only difficulty you'll have with
Yeah.
it. But yeah, that's Birth of a Nation. There was no way that was going to get into the canon, and I'm mad that this is one of two silent movies. That's why all of my recommendations are all going to be silent movies, because I'm like, there are much better ones that should be in the canon
that are not. So, Sailor, I think you and I agree. We've talked this over with the powers that be. There might be some not revotes, but there might be some new votes for new movies to enter the canon in the coming months. So there will be an updated list that we will continue to pick and choose from to make more and more episodes of the canon. But Sailor, this has been a super informative conversation. Again, a really important movie, a hard movie to talk about, but I'm happy we did it. Listener, if you're still with us, we're happy that you stuck around to listen to the two of us shitheads ramble on about a movie from over 100 years ago. But we did it. We discussed Intolerance. It's forever enshrined in the canon. And now we can get to the fun stuff. We can do our recommendations. Sailor, you and I know the rules. We'll go through them for any new listeners, although I can't imagine that anyone is listening to this podcast for the first time with an episode about Intolerance. But just in case there is anyone out there who
God bless you. God bless you.
God bless you, because you are an absolute legend. And please, you know what? If this is your first episode, please ping me. Find me on Twitter, DM me or something, and we'll send you like a hat because you're just that's incredible. If this is your first episode. Rules for recommendations. We got 3 recs. We recommend 3 things for each movie that we induct, we'll say, into the canon. One of those recommendations has to be another movie. The other 2 recommendations can be any and everything. It can be TV shows, books, comic books, music, bands, albums, whatever it might be, a single episode of TV. We like to get weird with it. We like the connections to be as creative as possible. The only thing that we ask is that we don't recommend another movie that might be in the canon. So with all that being said, we can jump into our recommendations. Sailor, I will let you go first. We'll, same way, we'll ping pong back and forth. You give 1, I give 1, you give 2, I give 2, boom, boom, boom. Kick us off. What is your first recommendation?
Well, I would love to give you, because I really want to just give you all silent movies, because the fact that there's only 2 in the canon, and I think some of these that I'm going to recommend definitely belong in the canon. But my third one might be, I haven't really decided yet whether or not it's not going to be a silent movie, because there's a fun little connective thing to Intolerance. But my first one is a movie that is split into 2 parts. So there's a 2-part series to this. It is the 1924 epic, I don't use that lightly, 2-part movie, I don't know how to pronounce this. I should have Googled this. Die Nibelungen? Sorry. Don't know how to pronounce it. Die Nibelungen? Siegfried is the first one, and then the second one is Kriemhild's Revenge is the second one. It's directed by Fritz Lang. You'll be able to find it while I am talking about it. The first movie is a fantasy about Siegfried. If you've heard, um, if you ever watched Django Unchained, the story that King Schultz is telling Django about
Mm-hmm.
Siegfried saving Broomhilda, that's basically this movie. That's the story he's telling Django, is that he climbs the tower and he fights the dragon because he's not afraid of it and all that. All of that story is in this movie, and there is a giant, and it's a giant 60-foot tall puppet. I don't know if you're Googling this right now, if you could see that puppet, but it's an impressive practical effect of that time. I'm looking at it right now. It's such a beautifully made puppet, and he does it. Fritz Lang is a director that should have about 10 movies in the canon. I think he's one of the great silent directors that actually
Mm.
deserves his reputation because whatever. I'm done ragging on DW Griffith. Fritz Lang is one of the all time greatest directors. I would put him in like the top 20 of all time, and I think this is one
Hell
of his
yeah.
best. It's not one of his more well-known movies, this or the second one, and I'm going to get the second one. That's not my second pick because they work. They're two movies that were made at the same time, I believe, and they work as a unit. The first one is the fantasy of Siegfried fighting a dragon for his lady love, and then the second one, I'm not going to spoil, so I'm not going to get into the plot of it, and I wouldn't even look it up if you haven't already, because the plot synopsis does spoil a part of it. All I'm going to say is the first one's a fantasy, the second one is a revenge fantasy. And that's all I'm going to say with that.
Hell
And
yeah.
it works as a beautiful two-hander of the power of love and what you are willing to do for it and what you are able to do because of it. So I'm going to butcher it one more time. Die Nibelungen, Siegfried, and Die Nibelungen, Part 2. Apologies, I'm so sorry.
To
Kriemhild's Revenge.
all of our German fans.
Oh my god, I really should have Googled that beforehand. I really.
The- I
It's
think you're
such a
doing a
good
great
movie
job.
that I'm mad that
Der
I'm.
Nibelhugen.
Die Nibelungen. It's so bad.
Der Nibelhugen.
It's a fucking masterpiece, and I'm butchering it. But all right, on to your pick, my friend.
Great first pick. I love that you're going with all silent movies. I think all film fans should watch as many silent, older movies as possible, as many black and white movies as possible, as many movies pre 1960 as possible. It'll really just like enrich your understanding of cinema as a whole. So what I'm going to do for my first pick is not recommend a silent movie or an old black and white movie or something that's pre 1960. I'm going to completely go against my own words that I just said. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to recommend another movie that features multiple different stories of different people going through different things with a central theme about embracing love and rejecting intolerance. It's kind of a tongue-in-cheek recommendation because I think that this is one of the worst movies ever made.
Oh,
But
we're gonna
I
have
do
fights
think
if it's the movie I think it is.
no, it's not the movie that you mentioned before. But I think it's a movie that's important for everyone to see. I think movies that are this bad are important because we need to see what to avoid. We need to see what's not good so that we can continue to properly embrace what is good and embrace movies that are as monumental as
I
something like
really.
Intolerance. So if you like this movie, I might scream.
Oh,
For my first pick,
is
I'm
it from
recommending
2004?
Crash.
There it is. We're gonna have words, my man. Crash is an amazing
There's
movie. I'm so fucking tired of this goddamn. All right, speak your piece, and then I'm fucking gonna drag you through the mud. Speak your
uh
piece on how bad this movie is. Explain it to me.
well
Explain to me why you think it is an awful movie.
let's have this conversation off air.
All I'm going to say in defense of Crash: one, shouldn't have won Best
Please.
Picture. Should have been Brokeback Mountain. I'll give you that. And two,
Mm-hmm.
you cannot, in good conscience, tell me Matt Dillon is not fucking amazing in this movie. If you're gonna talk shit about this movie and then tell me Matt Dillon shouldn't have got an Oscar for this goddamn thing, he's so fucking good.
I
I
think it
kind
shouldn't
of
have won Best Picture, and I definitely think it should not have won Best Editing. It's one of the worst edited movies I've ever seen. And 3, I think American icon Don Cheadle deserves so much better.
Well, I mean,
But
his career wasn't super great at that time. I'll give you that.
I can concede on the Matt Dillon piece. I don't know that he's not the problem with this movie.
All right, as long as you give me that. But yeah, we're gonna have some fucking words. I have never. Me and Roger Ebert, we're all alone. We're a fan club of 2 because when I saw this fucking thing and then I saw the immediate backlash, I was like, I guess we saw different movies. Me and Roger saw a different movie. Y'all can hate, be in your hate club. Me and Roger.
That's hilarious. That's
so funny. He
funny.
named it like his best movie of the year, and I was like, yes, preach it, brother. Goddamn! I mean, it's not. That's crazy. Brokeback Mountain is much better, and it should have won. But I genuinely like this movie. It's not even an ironic thing. I genuinely like this movie.
Yeah,
and it's the last good thing
really
Sandra Bullock has ever done. I think
that's really interesting.
I think she's so much better in this than Blindside. It's fucking insane, but whatever.
Okay, well that's another conversation for another year.
That's a 4-hour conversation on how bad the Academy is all the time.
Give us your second recommendation before we go.
I'm gonna that other thing that kind of ties into Intolerance. That'll be just like a quick honorable mention because I really want to stick to silent movies. Another part of silent film that I talked about that I'm a huge fan of is, like I said, horror movies, but specifically actors within horror movies. And there is no better actor in the silent age than Lon Chaney. I can't get into it because this will be 4 more hours because I can talk about Lon Chaney all the time. But you guys know him, if you know him at all, as the Phantom of the Opera. He is the master, the man of 1,000 faces. He was a master of practical effects, Hunchback of Notre Dame, etc., etc. I can pick a million of his movies because I think they're all fucking great. But the one I think is super underrated that doesn't get talked about enough is the 1924 movie He Who Gets Slapped, where he plays a
They made a movie about you, Sailor?
Da, 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 oh, the hits keep on coming. I just got slapped from that Crash pick. My goodness gracious. If you're Googling pictures of this movie, if you've never seen it, just look at, because that's his gimmick, is that he's the sad clown. Oh no, I'm sorry. He's a happy clown, but in real life he's bitterly sad. And all I'm going to say is I really want you to see it, so I'm going to get real brief with it. It's a revenge story, like most of his movies are, about a rejected love and some people who wronged him. I think that is enough to set it up. All I'm going to say is you can make this movie shot for shot, scene for scene, and now, but with sound, and people would say, holy shit, A24, another horror classic. Like it all I'm going to say, there's a circus revenge that involves a woman in a room with tigers, and I'm going to let your imagination do the rest. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, in 1924, you're doing this? This is crazy. Lon Chaney is my favorite actor of all time. I love him dearly. I don't think there's anyone who's ever done it better, which is going to be my segue to my next pick. But Lon Chaney, genius. And I think this is one of it's not his best, but I think this is near the top of his best performances ever, and a movie that does not get talked about enough. Do I think it should be in the canon? Maybe not. I think there's like 5 others of his that deserve that more, but I do think this is a underseen hidden gem of his filmography that desperately needs more eyes. So 1924, He Who Gets Slapped.
Love it. Good pick. Yeah, I have no.
Have you?
I have no. I have
I
no
don't want
issues with
this
your.
podcast to run long, but do you? What is your familiarity with Lon Chaney? Have you
Little
seen
to
any of
none.
his work? Oh my
No.
god, you really need to get that deep
So
dive. I can give you
yeah,
like 10
I'm
that you'll love
I'm writing these down as we go, and I'll also catch them on the back end as I listen back.
because he's a fucking genius. He kind of looked like Phil Hartman, that old comedian. Kind of looked like him.
Hell
But
yeah,
if Phil Hartman knew how to do special effects,
love it.
I'm amazed no one. Oh, never mind. They did make a movie about him with. Never mind. I was like, I can't believe no one's made a movie. I was like, of course they did with James Cagney. It wasn't that good. Never mind. Moving on.
Moving on. I hope my second pick doesn't offend you as much as my first pick does, or first pick did. But
If you hit me
for
with
my
a
second
Terrence
pick,
Malick, I swear to God.
no, I purposely avoided all Terrence Malick recommendations for this episode because I know that caused some issues with us the last time around. But I'm gonna recommend. I'm also gonna recommend. I'm gonna recommend a another silent movie. A filmmaker and a film theorist who has said that DW Griffith is one of, if not his favorite filmmaker, really influenced a lot of the work that he ended up doing. A person who I'm not terribly familiar with their work, but someone who I would like to read more, to watch more. But I think a super interesting figure in film history. Has wrote a lot of theory about just like film editing, which I feel like is a super misunderstood aspect of filmmaking. That I feel like more film fans should like take time to try to understand, because it really is like a beautiful art form within its own right. I am, of course, talking about the one and only Sergei Eisenstein, and the film that I'm going to recommend is Battleship Potemkin, which
No.
is absolutely wonderful. But he cites D.W. Griffith as a huge source of inspiration. So there's the direct line from Intolerance to Battleship Potemkin, not just Battleship with Rihanna and Liam Neeson. That would be a weird pick.
It really would. It really would. I'm amazed that you're not going to talk about the. Well, if this is I think this is as hard a movie for people to get into as an Intolerance, even though it was made like 6 years later.
It's made
There
like
is
almost a decade later, and it's like an hour and a half shorter.
It is. It is a bit
Yeah.
rough because it is a bit slow, but there is a scene in this that keeps getting referenced 100 times, and it's the shootout on the steps, the Odessa steps scene.
The Odessa steps. Yeah, it's like one of the most famous movie sequences of all time. If you don't want to watch the whole movie, I would say just watch that sequence, and you'll sort of understand like Eisenstein's theory about or like theories about editing and like what editing is supposed to do within movies. It's like it's absolutely insane. It's gut wrenching, just like so emotional. But yeah, I would check out the whole movie. But if you're not going to watch the whole thing, just watch.
If you
The
don't think
Odessa
Paul
Steps
Haggis
sequence.
deserved that Oscar for editing, the Oscar should have been created for this movie. That's how good the editing is. And once you see that movie, I don't want to step on your third pick, and you can cut this out if it is. Untouchables pays perfect homage to it. That's a great movie. All I'm gonna say.
Not my third pick. So
all right,
a little bonus pick for all the boys and girls out there. All right, Taylor, what's your third?
Well, in my second pick, I don't know. Should I do my honorable mention after this pick, or because it's going to be really quick?
Let's each do one honorable mention after our three picks, because I have an honorable mention too that I don't really want to recommend, but
well, I did really want to do silent films, but I have like this one little thing that's not a movie, and I very rarely recommend shit that ain't movies. But my third one, when I said that Lon Chaney is my favorite actor, who I think is probably one of the greatest actors, well, the greatest female actress, or at least the greatest female performance I've ever seen, Maria Falconetti, 1928, The Passion of Joan of Arc. I think this is
Mm,
the fact that this is not in the canon is blasphemy. I think that
yeah.
I don't think there is a better performance committed to celluloid. Period. I think she's amazing, and what is more amazing than anything, I mean, it's the Passion of Joan of Arc. The plot, the movie is the title of the movie is the plot of the movie. If you don't know who Joan of Arc is, you're listening to the wrong podcast. Um, the the movie
Don't
was
tell people
lost.
that.
Yes, if you don't know who the fuck Joan of Arc is and you want to listen to Intolerance, what are you doing? But the entire movie was lost in the
We love
fires.
all of our listeners here.
The movie was made up of the B-roll, so it was like the second takes, the outtakes, and I'm like, this is the second take. This movie is made up of second and third takes. Are you out of your fucking mind? What? How good was her performance? We lost that, and now we're stuck with the second take, and I think it's the best performance committed. How good? Thank God it was lost in the fire, because I don't think I'd ever watch another movie. Because I'm like, if this is the tops, and we lost a better version of this, Jesus Christ! The amount of emotion that she can carry on her face, because again, this is silent, in a time when people didn't know how to fucking act yet. They were getting there, but my God, I mean, this is still 10 years removed from Intolerance acting, which wild gesticulations and everyone's like, wild movements and whatnot. This is about as subtle as acting can get until it's not. And I'm not saying that it gets over the top, because it never does, but she will hit you in the face with a sledgehammer with one teardrop. That's how good her performance is. And I don't think cinema has ever touched it. We honestly should have called the Oscars the Falconettis. And the fact that she didn't win the Oscar, and I don't even think she was nominated, that tells you that the Oscars have always gotten it wrong since the beginning. Since the beginning,
They have for 100 years.
They've always gotten it wrong. Always. The Oscars should have been called the Falconettis. That's as hyperbolic as I usually am with my crazy statements. You watch this movie and you don't tell me it's the greatest thing you've ever seen, then we're watching two different movies. Like, yes, I understand that I'm in the extreme minority with my love of Crash. And I'm not going to say it's a love, but I will defend Crash. I don't need to defend this. No one needs to defend this. If you have eyes and you can see, this is the best performance of all time. Period. Maria Falconetti.
I'm embarrassed to say that I've never seen it, but it is very, very, very high on my watch list. I actually might watch it this week. Intolerance has sort of kicked off a desire to, within this time watch some additional silent movies. So that's been super high on my watch list. I've only ever heard similar praise that it's the best acting performance ever put to screen. So
and you can't oversell it. Even if you haven't seen it, I cannot oversell this movie. Other people can be disappointed when I say Godfather's the best movie, because you come in with certain expectations. I don't think you can be disappointed in a performance. I just don't. Yeah. Like, she's leaving it all on the dance floor. Like, I truly think it's one of the pinnacles of art, really, of art. When I look at her face and the emotion she carries, it's art to me. I think I can't oversell it. It's an amazing.
Let's petition for it to make it into
I want you to know that I was supposed to be in charge of everything before 1950. I don't know what happened there, but I was supposed to be in charge of the canon before 1950.
All right, sweet. So for my third pick, I'm going to do a third pick and then we're going to do honorable mentions. So I think my official recommendation is going to be a movie that I think is playing, or not playing, but is like in dialogue with this movie, maybe more than it actually realizes it is. But I couldn't stop thinking about this movie while I was watching Intolerance, and I think it's doing a similar thing where it's cutting between timelines and the the sort of sequencing of when things happen across timelines is meant to convey certain emotions, certain themes, and like show the parallels between them. Um, it's a movie that I don't love, which I'm kind of not embarrassed to admit, but like I know that the mob will come after me. But either way, for my third pick, I'm recommending Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer.
This Hot Take City. I don't dislike this movie. I think this is one of his weaker movies, and I'll leave it at
All right, let's do
that.
let's do our
All I
honorable
wanted
mentions.
was fucking people talking about the bomb, and they never did, and it made me mad. I was like, come on, nerds, just talk about the bomb. That's all I care about.
Come on, nerds.
Come on. When there's a scene in that movie where Benny Safdie talks to Oppenheimer, I don't remember Safdie's character's name, and he's like, "You never talk to me anymore. You're off doing all your things. You never talk." And he's like, "I promise you, I'll give you 4 hours a week." And he's like, "Okay, I'll take it." I swear to God, talking. I was waiting for this. I was like, "Yes, we're gonna get the nerd talk." Never happened. I was so mad. I was the only one in the fucking theater going, "Yes, nerds talk about the bomb." Never. I don't dislike it. I need to see it again because I think I went in with a different perspective on.
Yeah,
I know.
It's
not a bad movie. It's just I had
certain expectations. I'm like pretty lukewarm on it.
Yeah,
but I still think that I think if you watch that movie and you're like looking for more movies that are sort of like it, or I think the douchey like film nerd phrase that is used is in conversation with, like if you want a movie that Oppenheimer is in conversation with, I think Intolerance is certainly one of those movies. So it's sort of a reverse recommendation because I assume most people have seen Oppenheimer but haven't seen Intolerance. So if you like Oppenheimer, you should go back and check out Intolerance.
Unless you're one of the people who went to see Oppenheimer just to see Florence Pugh naked, then Intolerance is not for you. Oh, actually,
because she's not naked, but there are boobies.
I mean, there is nudity in Intolerance, so never mind. I take it back.
Yeah, confirmed boobies.
Go. Yeah, there's boobies. You're welcome, nerds.
What's your honorable mention?
I'm going to go through it quick because I know you want to play video games. And guess what? This is a video game recommendation. It is L.A. Confidential. I'm sorry, not L.A. Confidential. Jesus Christ. L.A. Noir, which was that Rockstar.
You're the second person to recommend this game.
Oh, great! It's got some jank to it. It's not a perfect game, but it's a detective. It's an open world sandbox game set in 1947 where you play a detective on the case of this murderer. And the big gimmick of it is that they spent a ton of money on facial recognition. So when you interrogate people after you collect evidence and talk to suspects, when you interrogate people, they have subtle facial cues. Like sometimes they'll look down or they'll look up or they'll like flinch a little bit, and then you know you're catching them in a lie. And they spent a lot of money on this facial technology because they have real actors and mocap and whatnot. And that's the meat of the game. It's just talking to people, revealing the lie, and catching them in the lie, and knowing it's a lie because of the evidence. And you're paying attention to suspect testimonials and what have you. And that's the action, not so much. The open world really doesn't do anything because there's really nothing to do outside of the mystery you're solving. There's some mini games here and there. But the reason why I am tying this to Intolerance is because there's an action set piece at the set of the Intolerance set. And this is 1947. This movie was made in 1916, and that set is still up. And it's a big action set piece in the game. So it's a fun game. It's got some jank to it. It's not perfect, but the fact that it all ties together. The last story involves the Black Dahlia murders, so that ties into it. I don't think that's a spoiler. I think that should actually hook some people into playing this. And if you're a fan of Mad Men, you're going to see a lot of actors from that show in this game. So, LA Noire,
Sweet.
my honorable mention.
I love it. That was the longest honorable mention I've ever heard. Thank you, though. Good pick. All right, my honorable mention is, it's going to be super obvious. It's actually a movie that we've, not you and me, Sailor, but a movie that has been discussed before on an episode of the Canon in relation to another movie, but was also not an official recommendation, but just a movie that came up a lot while we were talking about the movie of the week, which was Boogie Nights. And I think I realized that not only is it playing with Boogie Nights a lot, but this same movie is also playing with Intolerance a lot. And I think the, dialogue that it's having with Intolerance is like very obvious. I'm talking about Babylon, another movie that I feel like a lot of people didn't like, but there is that like small corner of the internet that is like Babylon Hive that loves it with like all of their might. I think it's a cool movie. I dig it. But you watch Intolerance and you see those Babylon sequences and you're like, oh, a lot of the early Hollywood stuff that they're, showing within Babylon is about Intolerance, essentially. It's about that Babylon sequence in Intolerance. So that's my honorable mention. I'm sure Babylon will come up in more future episodes of the Canon as a sort of honorable mention type of movie. But there you have it. That's Intolerance. We covered it. We covered a whole lot more. We covered everything around the movie. I think we've said all that we need to say. Sailor, before we go, I have failed to mention the last couple of times that you've been on, but you and Duke have you've started another podcast that we're doing here at Screen Age Wasteland, the Total Recast podcast. It's back.
Yeah,
with
it
Sailor
is
and
back.
Duke.
Yeah, I mean, it was an old podcast with I had an old co-host, and then it kind of died. And I had another co-host, but those episodes are lost to the sands of time, so they are not to be talked about because I don't know how to edit things, and the files got lost. So I apologize to that man because wasted his time. So that X-Men episode and the whatever episode Fantastic Four episode, they're gone. You'll never know who I think should play the MCU Fantastic Four now because it's gone. But yes, the Total Recast is back. I think episodes should be dropping weekly. I think we did our entire season already, so we're way ahead of the curve. So check it out if you like hearing about two idiots trying to recast classics.
Great show. Available weekly, available Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all that good stuff. You can also just
I'm doing terrible job. Yeah, it's out there. You can find it.
You can find it, but you can also
terrible job of pitching this. Yeah,
you're doing a great job. But also available on the Screen Age Wasteland site under the podcast section. You can see all new episodes of Total Recast, all new episodes of the Canon. We will be back next week with another great episode. We will be talking about Pan's Labyrinth, so that should be a fun one. We will see you there.
On that one. Of course, everyone's on that one. I bet. Fuck, and I'm on Intolerance.
Everyone, yeah. Sorry, Sailor, but Screen Agers, we'll catch you then, and in the meantime, we'll see you in the Wasteland.
Till next time.